Hello, everyone. My name is Sherry Gibson-Walters, and I am the CEO of Harmony Caregiving and the host of The Art of Aging. Joining me today is Saskia Brumwell-Blessing, a social work graduate, beginning her master's at Carleton University, and she is the conference organizer for the Gerontological
Social Work Symposium, Anti-oppressive Gerontological Social Work Symposium. Yeah.
It is a very, very, very long title, but it's very, very,
Yes.
very important. So I'm glad it's got a long, long title. But Saskia, you're very involved in coordinating this symposium, which we've had the honor and pleasure of being able to participate in. Would you be able to just kind of highlight for us what the symposium is about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for introducing me. Nice to be back. And I will just say, we did kind of talk a little bit more about the purpose of the symposium in the last episode. So I'll just quickly touch on it for anybody that's new here. So the symposium is really about bringing together emerging scholars, researchers, academics, as well as practitioners, service users, and students that are all in the gerontological social work field. And the goal is really to kind of create a place where people can come together and expand anti-oppressive practice, talk about anti-oppressive practice. What does it mean? How can we do this? How can we make working with older adults more, more inclusive, less oppressive, essentially, at the end of the day. So it's based on a book by Dr. Wendy Holko, Dr. Shari Brotman, Dr. Louise Stern, and Dr. Ilian Ferrer. They wrote a textbook. It's called The Gerontological Social Work in Action, Anti-Oppressive Practice with Older Adults, Their Families, and Communities. So I learned from that book during my bachelor's of social work and learned from Dr. Louise Stern, one of the co-authors. So a lot of my answers or thoughts, I guess, that you'll probably hear today, if I don't reference a specific person, then a lot of the time it is coming from their work, from what I've learned from them, and what I'm still learning from them. So if you're curious about this work, if you want to get engaged in gerontological social work, it definitely, or even gerontological field, like feel free to look at that textbook and yeah, just learn from that because they're a great group. And this symposium is really transitioning from the first edition of the textbook, and they will be writing a second edition. So they're doing some research in between to kind of gather some more information and also just to continue expanding the field. So yeah, that's kind of a brief overview again. And yeah, I could probably talk about it for ages. So I'll turn it back over to you.
No, that's perfect, Saskia. Thank you very much for that introduction to that. And the work that you guys are doing is pivotal. They're super important conversations to have. And I'm glad that there is a fairly steady or fairly large group, I guess not in comparison to everybody we have in Canada, but definitely a large group of people that are super dedicated to making some changes.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add to that it is really the goal is to create a community of practice at the end of this. So that's what the symposium is really building towards is that continuation of how can we be a community, because there is people out there doing it, and it's hard to know that there's people out there doing it until you meet each other.
Yes.
And we're all so spread apart. So it's just like you and I were over video today, and that's how a lot of us are in this field. We're connecting across borders, so we're across time zones. So it's important to give opportunities for us to connect and learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely am learning lots. And one of the things we talked about last time was that there are so many terms and we write down all the terms.
Mhm.
So, what I would love for you to do, Saskia, is explain, if you can, what oppression is.
It's honestly almost hard to define because it really, especially coming from my social location as a white settler woman, I do, there are aspects of oppression that I experience, but from many groups that really experience the systematic oppression, especially here in Canada,
Mhm.
I benefit from a lot of it. I am privileged in a lot of respects, but it really is kind of there's a lot of charts, I feel like, that are really good at describing it because you can really see the different layers and the different types of oppression that people can experience based on their identity or many identities that they may have, being a
Mhm.
woman. So it can be your gender, it can be race, it can be religion, it can be your socioeconomic status, so much money you make, the type of job that you work, how educated you are, all of these factors that can either mean that you are less oppressed or more oppressed. So, there's so many good definitions of it, and I am not even going to try it. Like, I can't even try to do it justice in a few moments. I think it's definitely an important term to understand. So, always invite people to kind of go and look at different definitions because there's always new information coming out about it. And I'm always learning and changing my understanding of what it is. So, that's a brief overview, I guess, just of the basics. And then, the types of oppression that you can experience, we can kind of break it down into the different types. So ageism is a type of discrimination, which, people who are older can experience oppression based on their age.
Mhm.
So I'm taking this definition actually from the textbook I mentioned earlier. So ageism is defined as discrimination based on the basis of age and relates to the lowered social value afforded older people due to their chronological age.
Mm.
So we have talked about way back, I think, in a few episodes about chronological age versus your biological age, your social age. There's all sorts of different aspects of that, but ageism typically relates mostly to chronological age, and it expresses itself in the form of negative stereotypes, inequitable treatment, and discriminatory practices against older people. And they also quoted that another author that said, people cease to be the same by virtue of their age. So just really understanding that all of a sudden, because we're aging, the world sees us differently. The world perceives who we are differently, and then treat us differently based on that, and often in a negative way based on that.
Hmm. Can you give us a couple of, that was a great answer to that, Saskia, and I appreciate that answer. I think it's always easy when you can put like a very sort of, if you could give examples of what ageism might be,
Yeah.
just like a couple of key phrases that you've heard where people are like, is that ageist? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more that I learn about it, the more that I see it every day.
Hmm.
And I think the more that everyone else learns about it, the more you'll see it every day. I see it in my thoughts all the time, even, just um, I think we did touch on this in the last episode, but just like, how we use social media, if certain social media is for a certain generation, how we speak about, especially for women, how we look when we age, that there's less beauty or less, it's not as fancy and shiny and exciting to be older. It's a scary thing. There's a lot of fear when it comes to aging.
Hmm.
And it's not to say that if you are afraid of getting older that you're inherently ageist, but it does speak to the fact that systemically we are and are being ageist, because if you're afraid of that, there's a reason why you're afraid of that, and it's because the systems around you are probably communicating to you that it's a negative thing. So why, if you're feeling like you've had that communicated to you in a negative way, it's probably because you're seeing ageist ads, ageist education systems. The whole idea of being forced to retire. Once you're retired, you're too old now. You can't contribute to this business anymore. We don't see you as valuable anymore. Those are just a few examples.
That's great
Yeah.
examples, actually. I have not heard that before about if you are afraid. I just want to make sure I had that right. So, if you are
Yeah.
afraid of getting older, it means you're probably ageist.
I don't want to say that it means that you are ageist, but I do want to say that it probably means that you are definitely influenced by ageist
Yeah,
dynamics.
yeah,
And I mean, if I'm honest, all of us are, I would say. I'll definitely speak for myself. I do have ageist, thoughts and beliefs and things that come up here. And that's like, that's why we have these conversations, is to remind ourselves that we're all just learning these things a lot of the time. And it's a constant effort to confront it, right? So
yeah.
it's not to say to anyone that's like, oh yeah, I am afraid of aging. It's not to say that you're a bad person or that that you can't improve on that, but it's just, or that that's not a valid thought either. It's not to invalidate anyone, but it is just to recognize, where do those thoughts come from, and who do they impact beyond yourself? Because if
Yeah.
you're seeing, if you're afraid of it, does that mean that you have fear of older people? Does that impact how you treat older people, how you see them, how you interact with them?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
it's just to kind of, I guess, bring some reflection into that our beliefs and thoughts about our own selves often impact the way that we see others. So it's important for us to be aware of that and question that and not always just assume that our own thoughts and beliefs are the way that we should continue being in the world.
It's about awareness, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's why this symposium is so key, because it's helping not only the people that are already aware of it, but it's actually hopefully spreading the word to lots of other people like myself, who looks at the definitions and says, "Oh my goodness, I have to look this up and research it all," right? But
Yeah.
sometimes I think the thing with ageism too is that it's so subtle. It can be so subtle. Um,
Hmm.
can you give some examples of like just the subtle things that, I think there's a word that we touched on last time where it's infantilism, but it's like, where you're like, oh, that person is so cute. Well, you have the best of intentions by saying that, but it's
Yeah.
actually ageist, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good example. Yeah, I think it's very normalized in our society, which is also why it's even harder to catch. And that's the case for many, I would say probably all areas of oppression and discrimination, but it is one that isn't talked about very much. So I think that I think if you watch the media and you think about how people talk about an actor that's getting older or a musician that's getting older, even going to a concert of an older musician and wondering, oh, like they're probably, maybe they're not going to be able to sing in the way they once were because, oh,
They've
they
gotten
must be too
older.
old for that, right? And there are physical things that do change when we age. That's not to say that that doesn't happen, but it's just I think that there's lots of areas where we make a judgment based on age, particularly when people are older. I think the saying like you can't teach an old dog new tricks,
Right?
that's
Yeah.
is a major one. I know that's like a very basic one, but it is a major one too. That is ageist. That is,
Yeah.
it's believing that learning stops at a certain age, or I have to do something while I'm young because I won't be able to do it when I'm older.
Mm.
Seeing aging, I think, as a negative thing rather than a potentially beautiful and important part of our life that we're
Mm.
all going to experience.
Mhm.
Like we're all, well, you know what? I shouldn't say that. For those of us that are privileged to get to an older age, we should
Yes.
see it as a privilege. Not everyone gets to get to that place, and it is a real privilege. Um, but I'd like to assume and hope that you and I and we will get to be older women and have that experience. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. It is what you're raised, but you're also raised, who you're raised by and how they think about aging that definitely impacts you. And I know yourself and myself have been really lucky. You're 30, you turned 30, I'm turning 50. Very
Yeah.
close relationships with both of our grandmas. Like your grandma was very close with you, and my grandma's very close to me. And I
Yeah.
think that they had a lot to do with sort of shaping our thoughts about aging. Would you
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, absolutely. My nana, I always say, is like a teenager sometimes in an 80. Well, at the time, I used to say that all the time. She was 80. Now she's turning 90 in a few weeks. But I used to always say that she's a teenager in an older woman's body because she is young in her mind and in the way that she interacts with people. And I would argue that she still feels that way. And I'm quoting her really. She always says, I feel like I didn't have the opportunity to do some of these things when I'm younger, and now I'm taking life and I'm gonna experience it. So I really admire that even at 70 or 80 years old, she taught me that you can still make mistakes, learn new things, try new things, move to a new place, all of those different things. I'm very lucky to have that. Absolutely.
Yes, and me too. And both of our
Yeah.
grandmas live very far away from us, and so we don't get to see them
Yeah.
very often. And when we do, it's like very special moments where I think we actually really want to tap into that, the learnings of like the wisdom that they have to share with us, right? We still know there's a lot more that they haven't yet shared. So, but not everybody has that mentality, right? It's kind of like, meh, I can't be bothered, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
some people
Yeah.
just haven't been blessed with grandparents because families start way later in life. So they just don't have grandparents.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for, for bringing that up. I think it's important to, remember who taught us a lot of these lessons, who is giving us a lot of this information, and really ultimately we both have gained so much of this knowledge just inherently from the teachings from both of our grandparents.
Thank you, Saskia. You know
Mm.
what? Loved it. This was such a super insightful conversation. Thank you so much. And if anybody has any questions, I always like to say that, if you like the content of our podcast, please share it. If you can't share it,
Yes,
just
absolutely.
play it for somebody else who needs to like at least hear it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Thank you, Sherry.
okay. And so we always end with carpe diem, which is
Mm.
seize the
Seize
day.
the day. Yeah.